All right, you intrepid Herle Burlyites, welcome to another edition of the podcast now known as the Herle Burly, which in the days before podcasting went by the name Conversations I Used to Have All by Myself in My Head, sponsored by cannabis. The current name's catchier, eh? Okay, we've got a hell of a pod today. We're going to take a deep dive into BC politics with my good friend and now two-time Herle Burly guest, Mike McDonald. Mike's a brilliant human being. You'll figure that out over the course of the next hour. He's the former campaign manager and chief of staff to Premier Christy Clark. Currently, he's partner and chief strategy officer at Kirk Co, one of the leading communications and public engagement firms in Canada, and a senior research associate at Pollara Strategic Insights. And he has a goddamn blog. If you want to read what's on his political mind, go to Rosedeer.blog. Mike is simply the person that I trust most on BC politics, the most insightful person I've talked to about BC politics. I'm thrilled he's back. And today we're going to talk about the NDP in BC post-Horgan. We're going to talk about the Liberals in BC post-Liberal name and what the province thinks about Trudeau, Poilievre and Singh. Mike, it's great to have you back here on the Herle Burly. Talk about BC.
Thanks for having me, David. It's great to be back.
What the hell's on your shirt? It's a bunch of letters. I can't read it. What the hell's on your shirt?
So there we are. So people come up to me and look at this shirt and say, what is that, like a rock tour or something like that? No, it's the name of every federal riding in Canada, David. It's a shirt. Out. It's a shirt only people like you and I would ever buy. I'm not even sure you would buy it, but someone like me would buy it because it just spoke to me. And then when people see what it is, they kind of walk slowly away from me. And like I'm some kind of weirdo. Well, I am a weirdo, a political geek. But the store that I bought it in is called Madame Premier, based in Calgary. It's owned and operated by a former colleague of mine, Sarah Elder, who started this a few years ago, and she's got a website. And Madame Premier designs clothes for political people. Who would have thought? Get out. And she makes a good living at it. Well, I think she's making a go of it anyways. But she does a lot more. She's got a podcast and things like that. But I love what she's doing. And I went in there. I was in Calgary recently, and came out with 2 big shopping bags full of stuff. Now my daughters are fully clothed in political memorabilia, and they're not sure what to make of that. But yeah, why not? Hey, this is for this podcast. Got to put in a plug for that.
Fuck, I wish I'd known that. I was in Calgary recently too, but as is my habit, I got out of town as quickly as possible. Just a short stop at Peter's Drive-In for a milkshake and then out before anybody found out that I was there. But had I known about the store, I would have gone.
It's a nice storefront in Inglewood. There you go.
All right. Hey, listen, man, as noted in the introduction, BC politics pretty interesting right now. There's a lot going on. The most important thing I presume is that Premier Horgan has stepped down, announced his intention to step down, and the race is on to replace him. What's the state of that race?
Well, it's shaped up to be a coronation right now for the Attorney General, David Eby, unless someone jumps into the race. And, I'll just start by saying Premier Horgan has had a really tough battle in the last year with his health. With the return of his cancer, and I think like every cancer survivor I know, they fight it hard and do their best. And he's gone back to work and fought through it. But I think it took
your priorities somewhat too, probably.
Yeah, I think it took a toll on him, and as he said in his press conference a week or two ago. He's at the midpoint of the term, and this is typically where you ask cabinet ministers, "You going to go again?" And he thought, "Well, am I going again?" And he decided, no, he wasn't going to go again. And Horgan's a political unicorn. He scraped in 2017. I was, literally at Government House, helping the Premier Clark was pleading her case to why maybe that wasn't a good idea to bring Premier Horgan in. And as the helicopters were flying over Government House, Ben Chin and I and Stephen Smart were wondering what the hell was going on in that meeting. But we got back to the legislature and got the call. The lieutenant governor is going another direction, and that's how he started off. And he's had a pretty strong, politically speaking, 5-year run. He's retained his popularity. He went early, 1 year early on an election in 2020 that against the horrified gasps of the press gallery and others who were tut-tutting that you can't break your vow to have a fixed election date. And he romped to a massive majority. And he has a lot more political runway left. He's got a lot of political capital to spend, and yet he's made this personal decision for very understandable reasons. The thing that makes him a bit of a unicorn is that he's actually reasonably popular with BC Liberals and people on the center right. And the number of times I've heard people say, well, I don't like the NDP, but I kind of like Horgan, and I don't think he's doing a bad job. And even people that are still voting BC Liberal will say that. He's neutralized the opposition and neutered it a bit. It didn't hurt that, his matchup in 2020 was with Andrew Wilkinson, who, wasn't the strongest contender to go against. But nevertheless, like, Horgan has had that ability to reach across to another voter coalition and steal some votes, and also maybe not make them as angry, which I think is, in this day and age, is a pretty good accomplishment.
How would you characterize him ideologically?
I would say let's forget about right-left for a second. A lot of the debate in BC pivots around resource development. And, I would say he's definitely on the pro-resource side of the equation within the NDP. He did back LNG. He eventually went through with Site C. Even though they took a greener direction than the previous government, I think he and his team in the Premier's office were very capable of at least understanding the trade-offs and dealing with them. Maybe not to everyone's satisfaction, but I think he personally understands the importance of the resource industries more than most people in his party. So that's part of it. But I think he does have he has a style that is a centrist type of style. He in 2017, when he got into a position to govern because of the 2017 election, Bob Doerr and others who were behind him laid out a strategy to win the suburbs and to speak to regular people. It was not an ideological campaign. It was $10 a day daycare and get the tolls off the Portman Bridge, and a suite of affordability items that resonated in the suburbs. And, I was part of it, BC Liberals in that campaign. We'd lost the plot in the Lower Mainland, and they knew what seats they wanted. They were all in the suburbs. They got them. And that's what made the difference.
But it's not, I guess the reason for my question was, for people that know the NDP across the country who don't know the BC NDP and would only know the federal NDP, it's not the same party mentally, is it?
So in the BC NDP, and they got 48% last provincial election, but usually they're in the low 40s. You've got two large groups within the party in terms of within the voter coalition that they have. One I call the true NDP, which is that they vote federal NDP and they vote provincial NDP. And those are the ones that control the party. They're the activists. Then you've got what I call the Horgan Liberals. They like Premier Horgan, they vote federal Liberal, but they vote provincial NDP. And they're about equal. When it comes to the votes, pretty close anyways. There is actually a small little piece too that will vote federal Conservative, vote provincial NDP. But mainly you got the federal Liberals and the federal NDP that make up that voter coalition. Horgan did pretty well with the federal Liberal voters and the non-traditional NDPers, and that's why he won in the suburbs. And that's the risk that the NDP have now, is that Horgan's appeal, they lose that. When Horgan leaves with a new leader, they go back to the original paradigm that's been in place for a long time of, center right go to your side of the equation, center left go to your side of the equation, then we'll all fight for that extra 1 or 2% in the middle. And it remains unseen as to what impact's going to have on NDP fortunes here when he leaves.
So you think that David Eby is more left-wing or more opposed to resource development in the province than Horgan is? He's going to take the party in a slightly different direction.
I think that's the expectation. And that's the expectation within the NDP. I think that's the crowd he hangs with. And some of those voices within the NDP are gravitating towards him in the leadership. He represents a generational difference. Horgan's in his 60s, Eby's, I think, in his mid-40s. Eby's a formidable force, and he's not to be underestimated in terms of from a BC Liberal perspective, because he's smart, he's bold, he political, he drives an agenda like few other cabinet ministers in government, and he took on the money laundering issue in leading into 2017 and made that into a pretty big issue. It's kind of, petered out a bit, but it was an issue that got a lot of attention.
Did they fix it?
Well, the Royal Commission that came out, I would say, was a mixed story, and I think they overplayed their hand on it, but it didn't matter. They got what they needed out of it politically. He took on the trial lawyers and brought in no fault with ICBC, and for a lawyer, well, every attorney general is usually a lawyer, but for lawyers to take on lawyers, there's always a bit of caution there. But they squealed like stuck pigs. He stuck to his guns, and they made a change that led to decreased ICBC rates. So he's got that. He's now become a housing supply hawk. He's chiding municipalities for being, sounds like Pierre Poilievre, being gatekeepers, for not making approvals fast enough to bring on housing supply, and the developers are all like cheering, this is great, supply. But he's waiting. He's writing letters to council saying, please approve this project. So he's not your usual cat, but he's not Horgan either. And he's we haven't seen the side of him yet, but the likability side, I think he's doesn't have Horgan's likability, mainly because people don't really know much about him, in terms of his personality. He doesn't have the positioning in the center that Horgan has. I think it's perceived he's coming from the left. He did come from, earlier in his career, he was a lawyer for the Pivot Legal Aid Society, which has always took on really kind of strong lefty issues as advocates for. So
why is he unopposed? Why is he unopposed?
Because I think for some time he's, when people have whispered to me, obviously I defer to the real NDPers, true NDPers, who are actually involved in the party. I'm just an observer watching from the outside, but they tell me that he's had a lot of support at the grassroots because of the way he's operated, because of his abilities and some of the issues he's taken on. And what happened after Horgan left or announced he was leaving, the other guy that was been touted in the back rooms for the last year's Ravi Kahlon, who's the jobs minister, suburban base, one can only imagine that he might have support in the South Asian community, which is always influential in these leadership processes. He said, time for family. And by the way, I support David Eby. And right. I think that really changed the dynamic. And I think there's a lot of NDPers surprised by how fast this is becoming a coronation. I think people expected a race. I mean, look at Alberta. There's, I think, 8 or 9 candidates vying to replace Jason Kenney. 4 of them are women. There's diversity. South Asians running in the race. And the recent BC Liberal race, the second place was Indigenous. The third place candidate was Chinese. And for the third straight leadership, the NDP might be going with a white guy. So I'd say, what's going on, NDP? Like, where's all your stars? Where's all these people that are chomping at the bit to be a leader? This is a big prize. When Christy ran in 2011, it was a bruising race with 3 other cabinet heavyweights that she had to topple in order to get the leadership. So it is surprising because, I mean, It's Premier of British Columbia. It's kind of a big deal.
You get to be Premier if you win. Yeah, no, it's
it's a shortcut to the top.
So I know you're not a New Democrat, but you are an observer of BC politics. Is there a Horgan legacy? I know that he wasn't in office for very long, but what would he be remembered for?
Well, I think in part the pandemic. I think he actually stood back a bit during the pandemic in terms of the public health measures and let the medical health officer venture forward, Bonnie Henry. And there was certainly a period of time where Bonnie Henry was, up on a pedestal, probably still is. We don't hear from her as much anymore, but on the daily press conferences, she was wall-to-wall media coverage, and Horgan picked his spots. But the NDP had pretty high marks by mainstream British Columbians, I'd say, for their handling of the pandemic. So his managing the tone, managing the approach through it all, he let the health minister do his job too, Adrian Dix. And I think they looked like they had a handle on the thing. Next door, Alberta was the opposite. So that's part of it. I think on the economic side, Christie's definitely started the LNG opportunity, but he at least didn't blow it in terms of LNG Canada going ahead with the final investment decisions, largest, if not, I think, largest private sector investment in the history of Canada, and that will set to go operational in 2024. He did greenlight another BC Liberal legacy, which is Site C hydroelectric dam, which has had some cost overruns, but by greenlighting it, he owns it, and that caused some division within his ranks, but he went for it. I think the rest is a bit mixed. Christie left him a lot of really healthy balance sheet. The political criticism of the Liberals was, why didn't you spend more money on your way out the door? I think there was a surplus approaching $3 billion. We'd been paying down debt. He came in. Obviously, the pandemic happened, which just changes the equation a bit. But they started spending. And so, certainly the level of government spending is at a higher level now. So if there's a recession, you could see things get a bit tumultuous here in terms of structural deficits. Yeah. I'm sure, you have an NDP on the show, they'll give you a long list of accomplishments, but I think mainly it's the tone. I think mainly just he brought the business community heel. There was no one seriously out going after him while he was Premier. He seemed to have a style where people said, well, at least they're listening. At least we can engage with them. And his chief of staff, I think, Jeff Meigs had a reasonably open door as well in terms of stakeholders being able to at least, get the point across, even if they didn't get what they wanted to. But there are some deferred things, like some of the you can't find people to get jobs here right now, like the rest of the country. But there are definitely warning signs in the economy that on the resource industries, particularly in forestry, that a couple of years down the road, we might see a lot of sawmill closures. We might see some hardship in other areas, but as of today, the economy is cooking. Mainly because I don't know where all the workers disappeared to. They vanished. And, businesses can't find people to work for them.
In terms of the nature and the tone of Horgan, I had an interesting conversation with Corey Tenike after the Ontario election about their successful inroads among working class Ontarians and winning seats from the NDP that had been NDP strongholds. In old manufacturing sectors and in Northern Ontario. And he talked about the disconnect between the progressive parties, the NDP in particular, and working class people on the basis of environmental protection policies versus resource development, and on the basis of sort of identity politics, wokeism. And that he was, as conservatives around the world have seen, an opening for conservatives to take the working class vote on the basis of culture, not on the basis of economics. Or I guess somewhat the environment energy, resource development issues, economics. How is that battle going in BC, the battle for the working class vote?
That's a really good question. Well, I think Horgan was able to bridge all the different groups within the NDP and knit together a pretty good coalition. And basically, usually in any successful political party of groups that hate each other are very vastly different views on issues, but they all find common cause. Christy had started to chip away at some of that in terms of the blue collar and union jobs, and actually had an endorsement during that 2017 campaign from the iron workers. And Horgan pulled it back in, and pulled a lot of the union guys back in. But with EB, I do think the orientation, the expectations that there will be more catering to the wokeism and the climate activism side. And sometimes it's just what people hear. Maybe the substance isn't that different, but it's just what they hear coming out of their mouth that decides where they're going to, how they're going to go. And EB is not going to be, he doesn't have those relationships with the working class NDPers, like private sector, industry types that Horgan's had. Horgan's been around a long time. And this is the opportunity for Kevin Falcon, who's the new BC Liberal leader, is to find a way to remake his coalition with some of those voters. I mean, coalitions evolve all the time. And you've commented on your show in the past about what's happened to Saskatchewan and the NDP. They used to be the party of the farmers, and you can't find a farmer supporting the NDP anymore in Saskatchewan. Right. But the coalitions here evolve over time too. And the BC Liberals kind of drained out of the Lower Mainland into the interior to their own expense, and need to remake their coalition in urban areas and suburban areas. The NDP have to figure out how, post-Horgan, they're going to hold on to all those suburban gains that they made. And that comes down to not climate issues. It's going to be affordability issues. It's going to be, people, I'm generalizing, of course, but people in the suburbs tend not to be ideological. They tend to be like, I got to pay a mortgage, I got to commuting to work, I'm stuck in rush hour, I got kids, I got to get them to daycare. It's like, tell me how you're going to help me. Don't get on your soapbox and tell me how you're going to save the world. Tell me how you're going to help me. And that's where I think EB has to have an offering there.
So we've been talking here for, about 9 weeks now about a single topic, a hella big, as the kids say, planet-sustaining topic, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. More specifically, the actions our presenting sponsor, TELUS, have been taking to use their world-leading technology and their compassion to drive social change and a successful bottom line. Capitalism with a conscience. The two are not mutually exclusive if you work hard enough to get it right. And that's the thing about businesses really living up to ESG commitments. It ain't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, eh? Many just greenwash, and many others refuse to balance the perceived siren's call of short-term profitability with meeting ESG responsibilities. Last week, I mentioned that PwC has just released a report on the topic. It covers a lot of ground, including how our government can accelerate the standardization and regulation of ESG reporting in the private sector. It also lays out the private sector benefits that, frankly, TELUS has seen clearly for years now. That embedding ESG into strategy and operations and then reporting it all transparently is doing the right thing, the good thing, and it builds trust across all your stakeholder groups, which in turn builds value, superior long-term return on investment, improved employee satisfaction, ethical supply chains, and better outcomes for the communities they operate in. And when all of it works in a virtuous circle, public and private sectors feeding each other's success on ESG, Canada can keep pace. And when it all works out in a virtuous circle, public and private sectors feeding each other's success on ESG, Canada can keep pace with UK, Germany, and the US and accelerate progress on our own policies, like the 2030 emission reduction plan. Told you it was a big topic, Herle Burlyites. We end, as we like to do in my world, with the data. For further evidence of TELUS's commitments and progress, go to their sustainability and ESG report at telus.com/sustainability. Mike Murphy, the Republican consultant, said on Hacks on Taps last week that the midterm elections in the States are going to be about gas and groceries. And that seems to make sense in Canada, too. That's what politics is going to be about for the next little while.
Well, you're in the field a lot. I'm in the field a lot in terms of research, and affordability definitely is, and especially in our situation here, housing affordability.
Yeah.
And who knows what mortgage rates will do to that, but probably worsen it. But that's what's on people's minds right now. That's for sure.
Yeah, the interest rates run the prices down, but don't make it any more affordable. It's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the interim leader of the Conservative Party attacking the Bank of Canada for increasing rates the other day. I wasn't sure. I thought Pierre Poilievre was attacking the not having higher rates. I don't know what's going on anymore. Political responses to monetary policy. So
fight inflation, but don't raise interest rates. So
yeah.
While we're talking about the shifting coalitions, you wrote on your blog a kind of a very sentimental, elegiac recollection of the formation of the BC Liberals as a political force in British Columbia. I read it with great interest because I lived through the Art Lee and Shirley McLaughlin eras. So
there's some names you haven't heard on your podcast before. Yeah,
that is for sure. And without dragging people through that history, what prompted you to write that? What were you thinking about when you wrote that?
Well, I was a big part of it, for starters, and I, on my blog, I like to go back in history and relate it to why things are the way they are today. And going back, the article I think you're referring to is probably about the 1991 campaign and how that all happened. And it was a bit of a big bang, like we went from 7% to 33 in a heartbeat and 0 to official opposition. And mainly is because of huge disenchantment with the governing Socreds. And, voters were looking for something different at the time. And we were credible enough for them to take a chance. And, that happens rarely in politics, when somebody comes out of nowhere and bursts onto the scene. And when that did happen, though, when a party has no infrastructure and has no collective memory about how you do things, it can be fairly chaotic, and it creates another vacuum as to how are you going to, what's your next step? Because in Manitoba, Carstairs did the same thing, went from obscurity to official opposition, but then they fell back. But in BC, there was a leadership change, and Gordon Wilson, who'd led them to the breakthrough, wasn't seen to be the guy who could lead them to the next step. And Gordon Campbell came in, the mayor of Vancouver at the time, and he consolidated things. And that coalition continued to evolve and remake itself over the next 25 years, to the point today that it's barely recognizable. Same party, but it's not even recognizable to what it was in 1991.
This is the point, right? In 1991, there was the Socreds, there were the NDP, and then there were like a handful of people who called themselves liberals, but it was a liberal party.
It was.
And then you had that big surge in 91 and blew out the Socreds. And what followed that, and what followed the replacement of Gordon Wilson, was the evolution of the BC Liberal Party into the BC Free Enterprise Party. Right? Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
It basically it became an umbrella group that was not hugely dissimilar to the Socreds it had replaced.
But I'll say, though, that I think the big difference, David, is that it became a coalition similar to the Social Credit Party, but with liberal-minded people much more involved. At the top, but also around it. It was much more welcoming to a lot of federal liberals who had stayed away from the Socreds in later years because of Van der Zalm and just the policy direction of the government. And then it created this whole new opening for not just liberals, but for a whole set of new political actors to come in and swept out all the Socreds. I mean, some of them came back to the liberals, But it was a big shakeup, right? And it was just like, it's like, in hockey, you trade away all the players and you bring in the kids, that's basically what happened. And so it allowed the party to recenter itself. And then from there, it went on to just like, how do we work together as, people from a range of different, views? How do we, make sure we don't have a conservative party, killing us on the right-hand side? And you make all those trade-offs as you go. And for six elections in a row, the BC Liberal Party won the popular vote. And 4 of those were majority government. 2 of them they ended up not governing, even though they won the popular vote. So a pretty successful vehicle, one of the most successful vehicles in the last 50 years in Canada, I would argue.
Great. So you lost one election, barely, and then lost another election. Yeah. Well, you didn't actually lose the 2017 election.
In 96.
You lost government. You lost government in 2016.
Yeah,
you lost government in 2017, and then you got smoked in 2020, right? Okay.
Yeah, well, 2020 was the first time since 1996 that they hadn't won the popular vote.
Right. So why is there such a drastic reaction to that loss? For instance, changing the name of the party.
Well, the change the name discussion is not new. I went through it in 1997 when I was an organizer with the BC Liberals, and we came out of losing that 96 election, and very similar commentary, like, gotta get rid of that name. It's a real irritant. And we had a lot of meetings and, provincial council meetings. And finally, people came to the conclusion that the name's not the issue. We just got to deal with other stuff. And then we went on to win 77 out of 79 seats in the next election, So then won 2001, won 2005, won 2009, leadership race, HST had happened, the party was in a bit of trouble, and it was under Christy that the discussion came up again. She was open to it, in part because as a Liberal, that's coming from the Liberal side, we were in a weaker position with the right side of the coalition at the time. And she showed an openness to have the issue. The real issue here is there's not many great alternatives. What are you going to change the name to? And I think one that
the BC party.
The BC party wasn't available. The name, somebody else had reserved the name, and it wasn't possible to get the name. And I'm not sure whether that's still the case today, but
because the Saskatchewan party is a brilliant piece of branding.
And the Yukon party, Yukon party,
really hard to run against that, and you have no federal ties that you have to defend.
Yeah,
but I think about what you're going through there right now, and it seems to me it must be a push by the Conservatives in the coalition who want to get rid of that name.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking about how Brad Wall came to office with a coalition. The Sask party was supposed to be a coalition too, but as Liberals learned, being the junior partner in a coalition can be very junior.
Yeah. Well, here's the funny thing, that conservative-minded people are driving that debate about changing the name of the party, and it became a leadership. Most of the contenders said we should look at changing the name of the party. But when you do the Venn diagram of federal ridings and provincial ridings, the BC Liberal wins basically overlap with the federal Conservative wins. So the problem isn't Conservatives. Conservatives were the ones that elected BC Liberals in 2020. It's the federal Liberals that went out the back door, and are gone. So, in some ways, I think if you want to put a punctuation mark on the Liberals are gone, change the name of the party. But I'm kind of blasé on the whole thing anyways. If it changes, I'm not emotionally attached to it. As we talked about earlier, over the course of 30 years, the party's changed in a lot of ways. But what it has to do, the much more important things than changing the name are the effectiveness of the leadership and the policies. That's what will get the support. Changing the name, I think most voters just, you have the risk of voter confusion, but you also have are they just trying to change the name and not deal with the real problems? So, we'll see. If they come up with a good name,
Come up with a good name. So recently, our sponsor CN devoted a day to celebrating safety. Workplace safety is an industry grail. We've all seen those signs in factories and on industrial sites tallying accident-free days. But when your job is deploying some of the most powerful machines on Earth to move millions of tons of cargo over thousands of miles every year, safety becomes a baked-in prime directive. CN is responsible not just for keeping its 20,000-plus railroaders safe, but also all the cities, towns, and villages along its North American network. Anyway, CN's safety celebration honored several employees who've gone the extra mile of ingenuity, so to speak, like the track inspectors in Manitoba who began carrying cans of spray dye, using it to expose rail defects that might have caused a serious accident had they gone unnoticed. The railway also spotlighted 42 individuals who managed to serve 35 years or more without a single injury. One of them was a fellow named Tim Stambaugh, who started with CN in Alberta in 1976. He remembered that back then, safety was something you learned about on the fly. You figured it out for yourself. He's still a railroader, and when he collected his award, he said CN's modern training programs and safety standards now set the standard in the industry and are widely copied. After 46 years in railroading, Tim had two signal pieces of wisdom. First, he said, think about what you're doing. Impulse can be deadly. Second, he said, if we keep improving, luck will have no place on the railroad. Luck has no place on the railroad. How's that for an excellent slogan? Congratulations to them all. All right, listen. So, the conservative parties across North America are being roiled by the surge of power of movement conservatives, of people who reject the centrism and moderation of historic conservative Republican parties and want true conservative policies in place. And, it's an enormous factor in the federal party right now in Canada. How is the Free Enterprise Coalition in British Columbia managing, given what you said about that the losses were in the Lower Mainland? The losses were centrists and moderates moving to the NDP from the Liberals. How are you handling movement conservatism?
I think it's a bit different provincially in BC because we tend to vote more on an economic frame as opposed to values driven frame, which I would argue federally is more so. And there still is a BC Conservative Party on that flank, and they tend to take in the fringe. And I would say, let's not go get the fringe. Like, let's keep the fringe. They'll come in and they'll pollute the whole thing, and there'd be too much toxicity in the mainstream base. They'll drive away the moderates on the other side. When Christy ran in 2013, she had a BC Conservative leader on the debate podium, John Cummins, former MP. They got 5% of the vote. We won a majority government. No Conservative leader in the debate in 2017. They hardly ran any candidates, and we lost. Ultimately lost government. And I think there's carefully controlled. There's a bit of an advantage to having someone on your right flank to make you look normal.
Triangulation.
Yeah.
Triangulation.
Exactly. So, I think there are still diversity of views in the BC Liberal Party, and you'll have some evangelical and other types that are more angrier and stuff, and there are people with different views on vaccine mandates and things like that. But we just had a leadership race not that long ago, and there weren't any serious mobilization of those forces. And Falcon, I think, is a fairly conventional leader in that regard. He's not. He understands the need to get for liberal support as well as conservative support. So he's wanting to keep let's widen the tent as much as possible. Let's not go down. I don't think he's looking to mobilize the masses like Poilievre's trying to do. In terms of creating fomenting voter anger on values. Like, he'll try to foment anger on management of the economy, probably.
Okay, but he was, when he, in 2011 or whatever, he was the Conservative running against Christie, was he not?
Yeah, I mean, positionally.
So is he right wing of, is he right wing of Christy Clark?
This is a trick question.
No.
Their labels were liberal and conservative. Christie is a liberal, Falcon is conservative. During that leadership race, I hate, sorry, too many history lessons here, but during that leadership race, Christie was more of a fiscal hawk than Falcon was. And she proved that as premier. And, Falcon was finance minister for a couple of years and did his thing. But, to a fault, she was a penny pincher and running big surpluses, paying down debt. So it depends what your definition of right wing is. Is Christie more fiscally conservative than Kevin? Well, the record shows as much or maybe more on social issues. Maybe the other way, but Christie's evolved too. Like Chris, 6 years in government, makes an impact on you, and she's had to make a lot of trade-offs. So I don't know; they're hard to peg. But from a background, like Kevin's been an active federal conservative over the years, and Christie is not. So there you go.
Right. Cool. Just quickly, is the Green Party still a force out there? I mean, they were part of the original Horgan governing coalition because they had elected some members, and then he ditched them unceremoniously at the first opportunity. Where are they at now? Federally, they're just destroying themselves, incredibly Mickey Mouse fashion.
They're lurking. The leader, they have 2 seats that seem to be relatively secure on the island. Sonia First knows the leader, so she's two-term MLA, as is Adam Olson. And they almost won a third in West Vancouver, Sea to Sky. They lost on the recount. They were ahead going into the recount. They lost in the recount. BC Liberals held the seat. So usually, you've been around long enough to know that when you hear West Vancouver, the kind of hoity-toity type of place, you associate that with like last place you'd see a lefty getting elected. But actually, there's more population up in Squamish and Whistler now in that riding. And it's very green up there. And lifestyle, they're not big into unions up there, but they're big into environment and lifestyle and mountain biking and all that kind of stuff. Right. Cannabis. And and so the Green candidate almost won. And so I think next election, that may be, as coalitions remake themselves and build themselves, that's when BC Liberals going to have a really tough time holding on to that seat next time. Now, there's going to be electoral redistribution. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's so the Greens have some opportunity for advances. Now, if the NDP became very unpopular, the Greens would have some mojo on Vancouver Island as well. I don't think they're threatening to be governed anytime soon, but they're 15% of the vote.
So they've not collapsed the way it has federally. They've not collapsed.
Not at all. No. And they have 3 elected Greens on Vancouver City Council as well, and 2 of them were number 1, number 2 last civic election. They're coming up again in October, but they, I think, retain their popularity. So, the Green brand is still getting out there.
All right. Interesting. Let's switch to federal politics. Mm-hmm. How's Trudeau doing out in BC?
Well, I don't think he's doing that well. I think it's a reflection of how I perceive nationally. I think there's a bit of a malaise there. But I will say this for the Liberals, having grown up in BC and fought Liberal campaigns for a long time, what's different under Justin is that they have grown their base out here. So it's not just a Vancouver-centric base, it's now Surrey as well. And that's significant because Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia in the not too distant future. And they'll, in the current federal redistribution, they'll inevitably get another seat. So that's, a bit of a paradigm shift. I don't think any Liberal had been elected in Surrey. There wasn't even one elected in 1968. I mean, there hadn't been anybody elected until most recently Suk Dhaliwal got elected, and now he's got company.
Well, Suk got elected in 2004, didn't he? In 2006.
Yeah, he got elected, then he lost, and then And then finally it's stuck now. And in the last federal election, they won back a seat they'd lost. And they look pretty strong out there. So that's changed. And the Liberals are just much more competitive in the lower mainland than they historically have been. There's still, there's always hopes that they can restart something in Victoria, because David Anderson had that seat for a long time, but they don't seem to be able to do that. They were optimistic about maybe Kamloops. They had a seat in Kelowna, which they lost. So I think regional urban centers is of interest to them, but the cold, dead-eyed, vote calculating backroom guys will hunker down in the lower mainland seats and try to squeeze a few more out.
It's a terrible way to describe Bruce Young.
The dead-eyed. There'll be a lot of yelling.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of yelling.
And he might be in his underwear, but I guess the other thing about BC politics as it relates to federal politics is that where federal Liberals have made a breakthrough in the past was when the provincial NDP government was quite unpopular. And like in the 1990s, when the provincial NDP were really unpopular, that's when the federal NDP got blown out here. So Horgan's popularity has actually helped the federal NDP, because they haven't, the brand has been pretty strong.
Right.
But if things sour provincially, and maybe Jagmeet Singh's got half his seats are in BC.
Yeah.
So that could have an impact on the federal NDP.
So you've been watching politics for a long time. Should Trudeau run again?
Well, if he runs again, that'd be four, and he wins, that'd be four successive mandates. I think only Laurier and John A have done that. So that's history making. If he succeeds in that, and I think Poilievre, I cannot imagine a scenario where Poilievre doesn't win this leadership, but I have to think that a fight against Poilievre is get his juices flowing again. It doesn't mean he should run again, but I can see why the appetite might be there to run again. I do think the Liberal government is like any government that's, 7 years in right now, has lost a lot of its shine. And, they've gone from 39% to 33% to 32%. Their vote is so efficient right now, especially in Ontario, that how many times do you want to tempt fate doing that? So they need to broaden out their coalition again and grow, because they can't have any further diminishment at all, in my opinion. And
right. It's almost like we get no votes where we don't win. Either we win or we're out of it, right?
Which is bad. I've heard you talk about it in the past too. It's bad for Canada. I want all the national parties, particularly the top two, to be competitive everywhere. Because look at the alienation in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I know there's a couple Liberal MPs there, but in Alberta, but it's not healthy, and it's not even just a provincial thing. It's an urban-rural thing too, where much of rural Canada feels unrepresented by this government. And if the shoe was on the other foot, the cities would feel unrepresented. So, I know it's always tempting, and I was when I was in that position too, it's always like swing seats, go to the winnable seats, don't worry so much about your safe. Don't worry so much about the ones you're not going to win. Just focus on the swings. But over time, it's not, it's not a great thing.
No, it isn't. It isn't great electorally, because as I experienced in Ontario, as your territory shrinks, your paths to victory become very limited, right? So you got to win every seat you're competitive for in order to win an election.
The other thing about it, David, is it goes hand in hand with the decline in membership activity within political parties. So, like even in the old days, when the Liberals weren't winning any seats in BC, there were still pretty active riding associations here. And I'm going back a ways here to my youth. But, I remember a time in Mission Port Moody where we'd have a monthly meeting and, we'd have speakers come out and that
was a place where we'd gotten about 10% in a by-election in like 1983 or something like that. I remember it being incredibly 5%. Shocking. 5%, right.
5%, in part because the Liberal candidate had a French name.
You don't like Trudeau? Here's our candidate.
Yeah. Poor old Louis de Pratt. Louis de Pratt. God love him. And of course he was a lawyer,
Yeah.
But
you know what you're saying, back in those days, if you were the riding president of Mission Port Moody,
yeah,
right? The Liberal Party was a joke in Mission Port Moody, but you were a deal.
Yeah.
Right?
In fairness, we doubled our vote to 11% the succeeding election day.
Right. But being the riding president of anything, being involved in a riding, you got to meet federal cabinet ministers. You were kind of an insider. You went to conventions and participated in, in the selection of the leader. You were pretty important in who was going to be the leader of the party.
Part of something bigger. And I think, I feel like we've lost a lot of that. And sure, I'll take my share of the blame too, because I think the preoccupation today is candidates and winning. And a lot of it, frankly, a lot of riding associations, their only communication with head office is, here's who your candidate is going to be. Shut up.
Right. Yeah.
And I was just, I noticed in the recent Ontario election, the Ontario Conservatives in one seat said, here's who your candidate's going to be, and they said no, and the independent won as a rebellion on that. So like that happens in all parties. And, the system needs active members. And so to your Saskatchewan analogy, like it would be better for the federal Liberal Party to hear more from members in Saskatchewan who go to conventions and attend meetings and are a bit of a louder voice. I mean, back in the day when there were no seats, you'd hear from, I'm sure, Ralph Goodale and Tony Merchant, and, the BCers would hear from other people, and there'd be a strong network. And I'm sure some people who are involved today would disagree with my analysis of that, but because they'll say the membership list has never been higher. But what you get?
It's a supporter list, and it's not a party; it's a movement.
No one. I really sound old now. No one phones anybody anymore. Like, hey, come out to this meeting. Like the twisting arm stuff. It's all like, they don't even email anymore. I think it's all by TikTok or something. I don't know. But anyway, so that element's missing. I missed that.
So, what do you think about Poilievre's campaign? Obviously, as a leadership campaign, it's as buttoned down and efficient and effective as you could possibly see. So it's hugely effective. He's going to win the leadership by leaps and bounds, and would have if Brown was in it anyway. But what does it portend for the election?
I'm thinking of getting him to, if I buy a cabinet, I'm going to get him to, do all my woodwork.
Exactly. But, reclaimed wood.
I mean, his social media is obviously quite something, right?
First of all, that's a good place to jump off for him, Mike. Like, when you watch that video about the wood, do you think that's a superficial metaphor or a deep metaphor?
Oh, I think it's deep. I think he's trying to associate himself with a feeling that the way Canada used to be has been taken away. And, we need to go back to, without saying anything explicitly, he's basically wink, wink, I'm your guy if you basically just want all this stuff that Justin's talking about to go away, right? And not just Justin, it's like all those elites, and, and he's like, he has seized on some issues like the passport line video that he did, which are just like, cut straight to competence. And, that are highly effective. Like as a communicator, he's really good. But substantively, when you like, I kind of view he as a high floor and a low ceiling. I think he's really firing up a base, and he's, like I said, I can't imagine he's going to lose this thing. And I think a lot of people are going to be really excited. And I think a lot of people, or maybe not as many, but enough people are going to be like, I don't know about this. Like within the caucus, there's Ed Fast resigned as finance critic. And, Ed Fast is not going to carry a lot of conservative troops with him. But he was like, I don't agree with what he's saying about Bank Canada. This doesn't make sense.
Right.
And that's just one little grain of sand in the whole Poilievre beach. But I think there's a bit of that. And then I think, look, guys like me who are kind of center right, who have been federal liberals over the years, older people perhaps, are like, I don't really like what the direction liberals have gone in some areas. If I was ever to consider conservative, I'm probably more inclined to go with a Charest or someone of that ilk. But Poilievre would be like, I don't know about that, either. So I think there's a bit of a mini vacuum that's being created in the center. You see like that center-race conservative groups kind of trying to do some things. I think at this point, I just feel like it looks, the elites are a little concerned, but I'm not sure how much following they have. But it's a bit of I think it's a barrier to him getting a winning mandate. I think he will have to show after the leadership that he's got other dimensions to him, because right now I think he scares people who are potentially open to supporting someone other than the federal liberals.
So, I've been looking at polarizations here in Canada. I was looking at a recent data set. We're close to 90% of people who say they would vote Liberal if an election were today are almost certain that they would do that. And similarly, 90% of the people that say they would vote Conservative in an election, they're almost certain that they would do that. Number of swing voters out there, by historical numbers, really small, it seems to my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you think about this theory that some attribute to Poilievre, which is, listen, we've got really low voter turnouts in the country right now, 50, 60%, sometimes below that. The way to win is not to fight about the handful of swing voters between the Conservatives and the Liberals, but to mobilize turnout and swamp the 50% electorate with 10% new people.
Yeah. Well, and this is basically what's happening in the States. And the difference in Canada is that in the States, there's a hell of a lot more money that goes into turnout. And you got PACs, and you hundreds of millions of dollars is going into this stuff, and you got churches and all sorts of you name it. There's voter mobilization happening. So scale wise, I don't think, even with successful fundraising efforts, I don't think we would see as much level of resource going to voter turnout. I also think persuasion, even if it's a small number, is still really important, because if they're going to vote anyways, that's a vote for us is a vote against. It's two for one deal, right? If it's just between the two parties. But I think the polarization as well in Canada right now is personality based too. Like, I think Justin is a polarizing personality, and whether you love him or you hate him, right? You may not love him. You might just go along with him too. But the fact is, he represents something, but to the opposition, he is like, he's the brand of why we're upset and mad. And
I would say there's three categories, Mike. There's love him, hate him, and irritated by him, but he's essential. That's the category. Yeah,
it's like I don't have a choice. I'm more concerned about the other guy. So I mean, if Justin did decide not to run again, I think it would change the dynamics somewhat. And Justin is, speaking of unicorns, he is a unicorn. Like, he's unbelievable, right? In terms of the amount of attention he can generate. And, yeah. And, he's still a formidable force. There's no doubt about it. So they risk going to a personality who's just weak, and pales in comparison. Alternatively, they have someone who shows a whole new look, has a whole bunch of new energy, new ideas, and lowers the temperature a little bit in terms of opposition to the government, and they can go grab some low-hanging fruit,
Right.
So, leadership changes always can go either way. But I agree with you generally on the polarization stuff. I mean, it is getting more pronounced. And, I feel like the Poilievre campaign, and maybe I'm picking this up from previous podcasts I've watched of yours with Jenny, that they're more concerned about getting the People's Party under control than going the other way, pivoting to their opponents. And the vaccine stuff's probably made that more of an imperative for that thinking, I would imagine, so that all those guys, anti-vax guys, don't run off and create a movement that cannibalizes them. But I would worry that that's going to cost them with the mainstream. Well,
that's why I have to conclude. That's why I have to conclude that they are operating on a different theory. Because when I saw Poilievre marching with that convoy organizer, right, I really did a double take, and I said, "Now I really don't understand this. Like, there's no conventional political calculus in which this makes sense. So they must be operating off of an unconventional political calculus, because that's not a sensible thing to do if you're trying to win an election normally."
Well, how does this play out? So he becomes a leader, and then, he's got caucus members who are going to be emboldened to actually say what they really want to say. And then you've got candidates that are going to come along, and they're going to say all sorts of crazy stuff as per the expectations of the mainstream, the media. And there's going to be all sorts of little stories about this candidate here, this candidate here. And I got to think that they anticipate that. They're just going to power right through it, and just say, that's the media elite, and da-da-da-da, and, we're tired of this, and we're not going to kowtow. I'm not going to fire my candidate. This is free speech. And they're just going to go sledgehammer all the way through. I think part and parcel of that strategy is, and Poilievre is very good at this, they will do everything they can to demolish the Liberals. It will be scorched earth. And having seen him, on TV doing the parliamentary committee stuff in the past, he's quick on his feet. He's got a very prosecutorial style, and I could see he would be quite effective as an opposition leader. And maybe it's just bring the Liberal House down, and they have no choice but to go with us. Maybe that's the theory.
Maybe that is the theory. How is the Liberal NDP governing accord going over in BC? How will that affect the electoral dynamics?
I don't know that British Columbia's pay much attention to it, honestly. I don't think British Columbia's pay a lot of attention to federal politics at all. In fact, I'm going to have to tell all my friends and family about the Herle Burly, because I was on this podcast called the Herle Burly. What's
it's about federal politics.
Yeah, forget about it. No, they there's not. First of all, there's no news coverage about federal politics out in BC other than Globe and Mail, and the Globe and Mail has a very low circulation in BC. So how do people even know what's going on in terms of the regular folks, right? But I think the problem the NDP have is that they're junior partners, and they're going to wear everything. Every time Poilievre Singh tweet something out like, and the Liberals should be doing this. I always get a little subtweet back. Like, I see in the comments, John Walsh, the conservative John Walsh is just like, you created it. I mean, there's that. That is the response, which is like, how can you complain about this when you're propping it up? Like that is the dilemma of a junior partner in a minority situation. And that's the Greens out here in BC struggle with that too. They try to create some of their own turf, but at the end of the day, the government's going to take all the credit for the good stuff. And then the junior partner, wears the bad stuff because people can say, well, why did you support that?
Right. You have no credibility opposing them when you're voting for them.
I think the benefit for them is they just get 3 years to regroup and they weren't ready for another election quickly. And, I don't think they're much of a factor. I mean, they're a factor.
They've got intellectual. They need money and organization, but they've got intellectual work to do because I don't think they really know what the hell they're existing for right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you said earlier. There's kind of the identity politics, wokeism type direction, or there's are we going to get back into people that have lower incomes and trying to get by? Are we going to try and make some of the traditional kind of class stuff that they've been strong on over the years? And I think it's a bit of a muddle right now.
They should get onto the class stuff. There's way more votes in the economy and the way it's treating working people than there are in identity politics, for sure.
Yeah,
Mike, we got to wrap up. It's been an hour already. Amazing.
Wow, time has flown by.
Time has flown by. Thanks for this conversation. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, David.
I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, the air quotes team that's behind this podcast. All of you people for listening or watching, and I really want to thank Mike McDonald for coming on the show again. He will be back. And hey, give a shout out to that store again. Madam Premier in Calgary.
Madam Premier.
Yeah. All right. While we're speaking of apparel, Jenny Byrne, I'm wearing your No More Goat Rodeo t-shirt. Just in honor and memory of you. Hope you're doing well out there. See you soon. All right. Take care, Herle Burly. We'll see you next week.